Sir, you're in a restricted area. Do you even know where you are? The voice was sharp, laced with the brittle confidence of youth and authority. It came from a young airman no older than 20, who stood with his partner beside a gleaming Security Forces patrol vehicle. He had that impossibly crisp uniform, the posture of someone who had recently mastered the art of standing at attention, and an expression that hovered somewhere between boredom and annoyance. Patrick Donovan, 86 years old, did not turn to face him. He remained still, both hands resting on the smooth, worn head of his wooden cane, his gaze fixed on the machine in front of them. It was an F-4 Phantom II, a ghost of a bygone era, mounted on a concrete pedestal in the base's Heritage Park. Its paint was faded by decades of sun, but its lines were still aggressive, still beautiful. Patrick knew every line, every rivet. He could feel the phantom vibration of its twin engines in his bones. The second airman, his name tag reading Chen, shifted his weight. "Sir, my partner asked you a question. We need to see your ID." The first airman, Davis, took a step closer, his voice louder now, designed to attract attention. "This isn't a public park, Grandpa. You can't just wander in here." He gestured vaguely at the flight line, a quarter-mile away, where the sleek gray shapes of modern fighters shimmered in the heat. "This is an active military installation." Patrick finally turned his head. His eyes, pale blue and clouded with age, held a calmness that seemed to unnerve the young man. He offered no apology, no explanation. He simply looked at them, his silence a stark contrast to their agitated energy. This quiet dignity was a language they did not speak, and it only served to irritate Airman Davis further. He saw not a man but a problem to be solved, an obstacle in his otherwise predictable day. He saw an old man who was out of place, and he was the authority designated to put him back where he belonged. The confrontation had only just begun, but the disrespect was already a palpable thing, hanging in the dry afternoon air like exhaust fumes. Airman Davis's patience, a shallow commodity to begin with, was evaporating under the Texas sun. He unclipped the radio from his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Sentry 2. We have a Code 1, an unauthorized civilian, at Heritage Park. Elderly male, non-compliant." The word non-compliant hung in the air. Patrick hadn't refused to do anything. He had simply not done it with the speed and deference the young airman expected. He slowly, deliberately reached into the back pocket of his worn trousers and pulled out a simple leather wallet. His movements were careful, methodical, the economy of motion learned by a body that understood its limits. "See, he's getting it," Airman Chen said, a note of relief in his voice. "Let's just see his ID and help him find his way, Davis." Davis ignored him. He stepped forward, crowding Patrick, his shadow falling over the old man. "Took you long enough. Let's see it." Patrick opened the wallet and produced a state-issued driver's license. The photo showed a man with the same pale eyes but with fewer lines mapping the terrain of his face. He handed it over. Davis glanced at it and scoffed. "Patrick Donovan, great. This gets you into a bar, not onto a secure military base. I need a DoD-issued identification card, a dependent ID, a retiree ID, something." Patrick met his gaze. "That's the only one I carry." "Then how did you get on my base?" Davis's voice was rising, accusatory. A small crowd was beginning to form. A few airmen heading to the dining hall slowed their pace, curious. A civilian contractor pushing a tool cart stopped a dozen yards away. The public nature of the questioning was a deliberate tool, a way to apply pressure, to humiliate. "The main gate sentry was very helpful," Patrick said, his voice even. "He recognized my vehicle's bumper sticker and waved me through. He said the commander had issued a standing invitation." This was, to Davis, an unbelievable lie. A bumper sticker? A standing invitation for some random old man? The absurdity of it fueled his aggression. A bumper sticker. "Right, and I'm the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. You're lying to a federal officer, old man. That's a serious offense." He pushed the driver's license back at Patrick's chest. "You're coming with us." He reached out to take Patrick's arm. It was a practiced, firm grip, the kind they taught in training to control a subject. But the moment his fingers closed around the thin fabric of Patrick's jacket, something shifted in the old man's demeanor. The placid calmness in his eyes was replaced by a flicker of something ancient and hard, a glint of polished steel. "Son," Patrick's voice was low, but it cut through the air with newfound weight. "I'd advise you to take your hand off me." The quiet authority in that statement gave Davis a moment's pause. Chen took the opportunity to intervene. "Davis, hold on. Let's just call this in. We can have someone from visitor control come down." "Negative," Davis snapped, his authority challenged not just by the old man but by his own partner. His grip on Patrick's arm tightened. "This is a security issue. He's an unknown. He's lying, and he's refusing to cooperate. Standard procedure. He looked past Patrick, at the gathering onlookers, puffing his chest out. This was his show. He was the one maintaining order. He saw the small, worn leather pouch attached to Patrick's belt. It was old, the leather cracked, the stitching frayed. It looked out of place with the rest of his simple attire. "And what's in there?" Davis demanded, pointing at it with his free hand. "You're not allowed to carry unauthorized items on base. Let me see it." He reached for the pouch. The instant his fingers brushed against the aged leather, the world seemed to tilt for a moment. Not for Davis, but for Patrick. The roar of a nearby F-16 taking off blended and transformed into a different sound, the deep guttural thunder of two J-79 turbojet engines at full afterburner. The smell of hot asphalt and jet fuel was momentarily replaced by the acrid scent of cordite and ozone in a cramped, vibrating cockpit. For a split second, a vivid image flashed behind his eyes. A young man's hand covered in a stained flight glove clutching an identical leather pouch. The knuckles were white, the cockpit shaking violently around him as red tracer rounds stitched the sky. The vision was gone as quickly as it came. Patrick's free hand, the one holding his cane, moved with a speed that belied his age. It clamped down over Davis's wrist, covering the hand that was reaching for the pouch. His grip was surprisingly strong, the knuckles and sinews of his hand like knotted rope. His voice was no longer quiet. It was a low growl, a sound of absolute command that seemed to come from another man, another lifetime. "Don't touch that." The change was so sudden, so complete, that it stunned Davis into immobility. The onlookers murmured. Airman Chen took a step back, his eyes wide. The illusion of a frail, confused old man had been shattered. In his place stood someone else, someone whose presence filled the space with an unspoken and formidable power. Davis, caught in the grip of a man he had dismissed as feeble, could only stare, his own bravado faltering for the first time. Standing near the back of the growing crowd was Master Sergeant Eva Rostova. She was on her way to the First Sergeant's symposium, her mind preoccupied with budgets and personnel files. But the scene unfolding by the F-4 display had pulled her in. She was a career NCO, with 22 years of service under her belt. She had seen it all. Young hotshots high on their new authority, procedural corners being cut, and the quiet dignity of the generations who had come before her. She watched Airman Davis, her eyes narrowing at his unprofessionalism, his need to dominate the situation rather than resolve it. But it was the old man who held her attention. She saw his posture, the way he stood, even while leaning on a cane. There was an ingrained straightness to his spine. She saw the look in his eyes when Davis grabbed his arm. Not fear, not anger, but a flicker of profound disappointment, as if he were a king watching a court jester make a fool of himself. And when he spoke, when that low, commanding growl emerged, Rostova felt a chill run down her spine. That was a voice that had been forged in crisis. That was the voice of a leader. While Davis sputtered, trying to regain control, Rostova saw him reach for his handcuffs. That was the line. An octogenarian civilian posing no threat was about to be cuffed in the middle of the base for the crime of being slow and uncooperative with an arrogant airman. She knew this was a mistake that could ripple far beyond a simple security incident. Without a second thought, she turned, melting back into the crowd and stepping behind a large oak tree. She pulled out her cell phone, bypassing the Security Forces dispatch entirely. Going through the normal channels would be too slow, too bureaucratic. This required a higher intervention. She scrolled through her contacts and found the number for the Wing Command Chief's executive assistant, a senior master sergeant she knew from a joint committee. The phone was answered on the second ring. "Sergeant Miller, this is Master Sergeant Rostova. I'm over at Heritage Park." She kept her voice low but urgent. "We have a situation. A couple of your SF kids are detaining an elderly civilian." She could hear Miller's sigh on the other end. "Another one. Just have them escort him to the visitor's center, Eva." "The commander's in a briefing." "Sir, with respect, I don't think the visitor's center is the right answer," Rostova pressed, her eyes darting back to the scene. Davis now had one cuff on Patrick's wrist. "They're making a scene. The airman, Davis, is way over the line. But that's not the main issue. The man, they're treating him like a criminal." "What's his name?" Miller asked, his tone still routine. "He gave them a driver's license. The name is Patrick Donovan." Rostova paused, then added the crucial piece. "Sir, I know it's a long shot, and maybe I'm crazy, but that name, it's the same name on the dedication plaque for the F-4, the one they call the Phantom's Ghost." The silence on the other end of the line was immediate and absolute. For 5 long seconds, Rostova heard nothing but the faint hum of an office. Then Sergeant Miller's voice came back, and all traces of routine were gone. It was replaced by pure, unadulterated alarm. "Rostova, are you sure? It's the name on the ID, sir. Stay there. Do not let them take him anywhere. I'll handle it. The line went dead. Rostova knew the message had been received. The cavalry, in some form or another, was on its way. Justice was coming. She just hoped it would arrive before Airman Davis did something he could never take back. Inside the wing headquarters building, a sprawling brick structure known as the White House, Colonel David Matthews was in the middle of a tense video conference with the Pentagon. He was gesturing at a slide deck explaining logistical shortfalls when his command chief's executive, Senior Master Sergeant Miller, burst into the room without knocking, a catastrophic breach of protocol. "Sir, you need to see this," Miller said, his face pale. He didn't speak further, simply placed his phone on the polished mahogany table. It was open to a web page, a grainy photo at the top. Matthews shot him a look of pure fury. "Miller, what in God's name do you think you're—" He stopped mid-sentence as his eyes fell on the phone's screen. It was a page from the base's own historical archives. The photo showed a young pilot in a flight suit, leaning against the nose of an F-4 Phantom, a cocky grin on his face. The headline read, "The Phantom's Ghost, the Legend of Colonel Patrick Donovan." Matthews's eyes flicked from the photo to the name, then back to Miller's terrified face. "What is this?" he demanded. "Security Forces," Miller said, his voice barely a whisper. "They're detaining him, at his own monument." The blood drained from Colonel Matthews's face. The color of his skin went from a healthy tan to a sickly ashen gray. He stared at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. The Pentagon briefing, the logistical shortfalls, everything evaporated. There was only this colossal, unimaginable disaster. He slammed his hand down on the desk, cutting off a 4-star general mid-sentence on the screen. "This meeting is over," he barked at the monitor before snapping the laptop shut. He stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "Get me the Security Forces commander on the phone. Now, get my staff car to the front entrance. Tell them to run hot. Now," he roared. To his aide, he added, "They've got Patrick Donovan at the F-4 display." The aide, a young captain, just stared blankly. "Yes, the Patrick Donovan," Matthews bellowed, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent office. "The ghost. Dear God, what are they doing to him?" The name, spoken with such reverence and panic, finally registered. The captain's eyes widened in dawning horror. A legend was not just visiting their base, he was in their custody. Back at Heritage Park, Airman Davis was riding a wave of adrenaline and misplaced authority. He had successfully secured one of Patrick's wrists in a steel cuff. The old man hadn't fought back, but the act of cuffing him felt like a victory to Davis. The crowd was silent now, their phones held up recording his triumph. He was in control. "See," he said, his voice loud for the benefit of his audience. "This is what happens when you don't follow the rules, old-timer. When you don't show respect for the uniform." Patrick simply watched him, his expression one of immense sadness. He did not look like a man being arrested. He looked like a teacher watching his most disappointing student fail a simple test. "We're going to take a nice long ride down to the station," Davis continued, his chest puffed out as he reached for Patrick's other arm. "Get you processed. We'll have to run a full background check, of course. Figure out who you really are." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial and condescending whisper. "Maybe we'll even get you a psych evaluation. See if you're fit to be wandering around on your own. It's for your own good." It was the final, unforgivable insult. It wasn't just about a mistaken identity anymore. It was a threat to strip Patrick of his dignity, his sanity, his very autonomy. Davis had crossed a line from which there was no return. He had sealed his own fate with that one arrogant threat. The first sound was a distant siren, a sharp, piercing wail that was different from the usual base alerts. Then came the screech of tires on pavement. It wasn't a standard patrol car that whipped around the corner. It was a black command staff car, a Chevrolet Suburban with polished chrome and official flags mounted on the front fenders. It slid to a halt just feet from the scene, its tires kicking up gravel. Immediately behind it, 2 Security Forces trucks, lights flashing, boxed in the area. The doors of the staff car flew open before it had fully stopped. Colonel Matthews erupted from the passenger side, his face a mask of controlled fury. His service cap was perfectly aligned, his uniform immaculate, but his eyes were blazing. Following him was the wing command chief, the highest-ranking enlisted member on the base, his expression just as grim. From the other trucks, the Security Forces commander, a full lieutenant colonel, and several senior NCOs disembarked, moving with a speed and purpose that electrified the atmosphere. The casual, curious crowd snapped into motion. Airmen who had been slouching and watching on their phones suddenly straightened their backs, their faces a mixture of fear and confusion. The air crackled with a new, terrifying level of authority. The temperature of the entire encounter had changed in a heartbeat. Airman Davis froze, his hand still on Patrick's uncuffed arm, his mouth slightly agape. His little show had just been gate-crashed by the most powerful men on the base. Colonel Matthews didn't spare a glance for Davis or Chen. His focus was entirely on the old man in the single handcuff. He strode forward, his polished black shoes crunching on the gravel path, covering the distance in 3 long, purposeful strides. He stopped directly in front of Patrick Donovan. He didn't speak. He didn't demand an explanation. He simply brought his right hand up to the brim of his cap in the sharpest, most profound salute of his career. His arm was ramrod straight, his posture a study in absolute respect. One by one, the command chief, the lieutenant colonel, and every other uniformed person who had arrived with him did the same. The sound of a dozen hands slapping against caps and brows echoed in the now deafening silence. They stood there, a line of the base's most senior leadership saluting a cuffed civilian. Airman Davis stared, his mind unable to process what he was seeing. Airman Chen looked like he was about to be physically ill. Finally, still holding the salute, Colonel Matthews spoke. His voice was loud, clear, and projected for every single person to hear. "Mr. Donovan, I am Colonel Matthews, the wing commander. On behalf of every airman on this base, I offer my deepest, most profound apology. We are honored to have you here, sir." He then slowly lowered his hand and turned, his eyes locking onto Davis. The fury he had been holding back was now unleashed, cold and precise. "Airman," he said, his voice dropping to an icy, dangerous level. "Do you have any idea who this is?" Davis was speechless. He could only shake his head, his face ashen. "This," the colonel said, his voice rising with each word, "is Colonel Patrick Donovan, United States Air Force, retired. This is the man they called the Phantom's Ghost. He flew over 150 combat missions in that very aircraft." He jabbed a finger toward the F-4 on its pedestal. "That is his name on the plaque you're standing next to. He was shot down twice behind enemy lines and evaded capture twice. He is the recipient of the Air Force Cross, 2 Silver Stars, the Distinguished Flying Cross, and 5 Purple Hearts." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Phones that had been recording a minor incident were now capturing a moment of living history. The snickers and murmurs of mockery had been replaced by a wave of awe and profound, second-hand shame. Everyone was looking at Patrick Donovan, truly seeing him for the first time, not as an old man but as a titan. This man, Colonel Matthews concluded, his voice shaking with rage, is a living legend. He has sacrificed more for his country than you can possibly imagine, and you put him in handcuffs. Colonel Matthews turned his full attention back to the petrified Airman Davis. "You are a disgrace to that uniform," he said, his voice a low, venomous hiss. "You have forgotten the very first principle of our service, honor. You have forgotten the last line of the airman's creed, 'I will never falter and I will not fail.' Today you have failed. You have failed this man. You have failed this base, and you have failed the United States Air Force." He turned to the Security Forces commander. "Lieutenant Colonel, I want this airman's patrol duties suspended indefinitely. He will report to my office at 0800 tomorrow with his supervisor and his first sergeant. We will be having a very long conversation about his future." He then gestured sharply to the senior NCO. "Chief, get those cuffs off him, now." The chief hurried forward with a key, fumbling for a moment before unlocking the single cuff from Patrick's wrist. As the steel fell away, Patrick rubbed his skin, not out of pain, but as if wiping away the insult. He then looked up, not at the colonel who had defended him, but at the young, terrified Airman Davis, who seemed to shrink inside his own uniform. Patrick Donovan finally spoke, his voice quiet but carrying across the silent plaza with the weight of decades. "Son," he said, his tone devoid of anger, filled only with a deep, weary wisdom. "Fear and pride are a dangerous cocktail. They make you see threats where there are only people. They make you deaf to everything but the sound of your own importance." He paused, letting the words sink in. "That uniform," he continued, gesturing with his chin toward Davis's crisp blue shirt, "it isn't armor to make you strong. It's a promise. A promise that you serve something bigger than your own ego. A promise to the people who came before you and the ones who will come after. Remember that. The lesson delivered with such grace in the face of such profound disrespect was more damning than any official punishment could ever be." It was a quiet, gentle rebuke that landed with the force of a physical blow. Patrick's gaze then fell to the small, worn leather pouch on his belt, the one that had been the flashpoint of the whole affair. He gently laid his hand over it, his thumb tracing the frayed stitching. The Texas sun vanished, replaced by the dim light of a canvas tent in a dusty forward operating base decades and a world away. A younger Patrick, his face tense with pre-flight jitters, was looking at his wingman, a cocky red-headed captain named Jimmy Rocket Riley. Jimmy was holding out the very same pouch. "For luck, Pat," he'd said with a grin. "It was my dad's. Carried it all through Korea. You just make sure you bring it back." They had shared a smile, a brief moment of connection before climbing into their cockpits. The image faded, leaving behind the ghost of a promise. The pouch wasn't a good luck charm. It was a memorial. Jimmy's plane had never come back from that mission. In the present, Patrick looked up, his eyes seeming to see a distant horizon. He had brought the pouch back, just as he had promised, and he had carried it ever since. The fallout from the incident at Heritage Park was swift and decisive. Airman Davis was, as promised, removed from all patrol duties and reassigned to the base's records management office, a quiet purgatory where he spent his days filing paperwork. The base command didn't just punish him, they used his mistake as a teachable moment. A new mandatory training module was developed for the entire Security Forces group, titled Legacy and Respect. It used the anonymized event as a case study in de-escalation, professional conduct, and most importantly, the imperative to honor the veterans whose sacrifices built the very institution they were sworn to protect. Colonel Matthews issued a formal public letter of apology to Colonel Donovan on behalf of the entire wing, which was printed in the base newspaper. Patrick, in a short handwritten response, accepted it with his characteristic grace, asking only that the young airmen involved be mentored, not discarded. Weeks turned into a month. One quiet Tuesday afternoon, the now former Airman Davis in civilian clothes was in the base coffee shop, the Java Jet, waiting for his shift to end. He was staring into a cup of cooling coffee when the door opened and Colonel Patrick Donovan walked in, moving slowly with his cane. An aide, a young lieutenant assigned by Colonel Matthews to assist him during his extended visit, accompanied him. Patrick ordered a simple black coffee and sat at a small table by the window, looking out at the flight line. Davis's heart hammered in his chest. He could have just slipped out, and the old man would have never noticed him. But the colonel's words, that gentle, devastating lesson, had been echoing in his mind for weeks. He knew what he had to do. He stood up and walked over to the table, his hands trembling slightly. The lieutenant eyed him warily, but Patrick looked up, his pale blue eyes calm and questioning. "Sir," Davis began, his voice cracking, I'm the airman from that day. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything. There's no excuse for how I acted." Patrick studied his face for a long moment, searching for something. He must have found it, because a hint of a smile touched his lips. He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sit down, son," he said, his voice raspy. "Tell me what you've learned." The lieutenant stepped back, giving them space, and as the afternoon sun streamed through the window, the disgraced young airman and the living legend sat and talked, their conversation a quiet bridge between generations, a testament to the power of a lesson learned and a second chance given. Patrick Donovan's story is a powerful reminder that heroes walk among us, often in the quietest of forms. If this story of courage and humility moved you, please hit the like button, share it with others, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more incredible stories.